Okay, I'm hoping that I don't throw the mic because I do tend to talk with my hands. So thanks for coming tonight. I always love to see this out of work time learning, and it's great to see so many future teachers here. Right before I got here, I went to the corner bakery to have some food. And when I was there, I saw two pre-service teachers. They were looking at a FOSS manual, and I went up to them and I said, "Are you guys teachers?" And they said, "Well, we're in the teacher ed program." And I said, "Are you going to the Cube tonight?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Great." And there they were collaborating, which is a big theme of my talk. So I want to give them a shout out. That was impressive. So tonight, I'd like you to come with me on a journey and just go back to when you were a kid, or your own kids were little, or perhaps your nieces or nephew, or if you're a pre-service teacher, perhaps you did some babysitting like many future teachers have done. And when I take that kind of journey myself, I see our son. He's age 3. I put him down for a nap, and I go downstairs. My aunt and uncle are visiting, and I think, great, I'll have a cup of coffee, it's quiet. And then we were talking, thinking that Kevin was asleep, until we heard a big thud. So of course I ran upstairs and I opened the door, and there was Kevin sitting, age 3 on the floor, just barely potty trained. He had a screw behind his ear, which is kind of where his engineer dad would put a pencil. And I said, "Hey Kevin, what are you doing?" And he had taken apart his red metal toddler bed. And he said, "I made a yachter." And when you look at a red toddler bed without a headboard and a footboard, it does actually look like a ladder, especially if the mattress is also off the floor. And so when I saw that, that picture in my mind just reminds me of the thesis, or the subject of my talk, which is that children are natural scientists and engineers. And that's what I'd like us to remember, because I've never met a kid that didn't like to test, push, pull, retest, and every little retest or failure is really just a step to a retest. And so when I think about my own children, I think about Kevin, and I think about our daughter Jillian, and she was constantly saying, "Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question?" Pointing to the moon. "Can I get there? Can you take me there?" And those kind of questions that children ask, they come to school with, they come to preschool with. And if we think about that, we can just dive into the NGSS. So the NGSS, I think of the NGSS as like a freeway. We all have to get on this freeway of the next generation science standards. It's the highway of STEM, and there's lots of on-ramps on the freeway. And it's our job to get on the freeway and to help our scholars get on it too. So the framework for K-12 science education was the genesis of the NGSS. And the NGSS didn't start in California. It was a multi-state effort. And states were getting together, and they wanted our science education to change. As Alistair said, it had been since 1998 since we had science standards. And we wanted science to be for all students, all types of learners, and it had 3 dimensions. And we wanted our scholars to be at the level of an international benchmark. We didn't want to be way behind in science. And so you've seen this picture already tonight. There's 3, and this says stands of the NGSS. And now when I look at it, I think, oops, there, I missed it. It's 3 strands of the NGSS. And together, it works. We have the practices, the core ideas, and the cross-cutting concepts. And like Alistair said, we used to be over here in the core ideas. We used to be in the content area. But now we want all of our scholars to do science and to behave like scientists and engineers. And that's a big change, because it used to be that engineering was something you did in college, right? You were good at science in school, and then if you went to college and somebody said, "What do you want to major in?" Lots of people would say, "Well, I was pretty good at science, so I'm thinking of engineering." But these science standards are really from before kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And so one of my colleagues who's actually here tonight, Holly Steele, she made this fabulous thinking map that I find teachers really respond to. So this is a thinking map, a bridge map. And so the science and engineering practices are how scientists and engineers work. We plan investigations, we test ideas. The core ideas are what we know. We know some contents. We know how waves behave. We know that the moon and the stars and the sun behave in patterns. And the cross-cutting concepts are how we think. We make models. like Dr. Lovelace made a model and then he tested it out. We look for patterns. So now I want to tell you how I got on the road. How did I get on this highway of the NGSS? And what I did is I had some training and I thought, where am I going to start? So I started with the area in which I'm most familiar, which was the life science standards, okay? I love gardening. We have a great garden at our school. And so I thought, this is where I'm going to get on the highway, and I'm going to go on as a single car driver. So I wasn't collaborating then, didn't have anybody in the car with me. It was just me and my scholars. And what I did is I had attended some PBL training, and so I thought, we're going to do a project-based learning activity in the garden with my second graders. And I had the head garden volunteer come and talk to my scholars, and she described 8 problems that we had in the garden with pests. And even then, you know, I learned about a new pest. Like, I knew about pill bugs. My friend Jan does a lot of pill bug stuff in the kindergarten. I thought of pill bugs as things that first graders bring in their pockets from recess, right? And I'm like, put the pill bugs back outside. But when we were in the garden volunteer told us that pill bugs were a real pest in the garden. So were gophers, rabbits, ants. I knew all of those things. And our job was to find natural, organic solutions to these pests. And what I learned by doing this project is that I could have done this PBL unit the entire year. I really could have just decided that I didn't need to plan anything else, because the scholars talk about needing to assign homework. Not. They were constantly coming in, Mrs. Slee, Mrs. Slee, Mrs. Slee. And one of the things we learned was that cinnamon and oregano are natural pest control agents for pill bugs. So whereas I just thought of pill bugs as cute little things that kids play with, and I knew about their body parts, pill bugs actually eat like eggplant. If the eggplant is left on the vine a little bit too long, then it's just decimated by the pill bugs. So we could just sprinkle some cinnamon around and some oregano, and there we go. We found a solution to a real world problem. And it was a solution that reminded me of our son Kevin, because the children just kept going. They just kept going, and what I would do as a teacher would facilitate their knowledge in terms of, okay, how can we record those findings? How can we talk to other people about those findings? So after I was emboldened with my own road on the highway in my single car driver, I talked to my teammates, and I was in first grade the second year, and we decided that we were going to teach the current content standards, and we always use the FOSS solids and liquids kit. But we were going to add in those science and engineering practices. And this is an important part for teachers. You don't teach the practices away from the content. They have to be intertwined. So you don't just say, hey, I'm going to build a bunch of towers this Friday, and the next Friday we're going to build towers with spaghetti, and then we're going to do parachutes, and we might do a potato launcher. Instead, you have to think, well, why did we do these towers? Well, we did them because we had studied the properties of solids. So then we gave the scholars a bunch of junk so that they could take the content knowledge they had acquired about the properties of solids and build some towers. And again, you can see these children were having a great time. But we don't just build the towers, because we are in elementary school. We want them to write about the towers, draw diagrams of the towers, share their knowledge with another group. And then we want them to redesign. So after this, the scholars walked around the lab, looked at other people's towers, and then I gave them more time so that they could look at the other budding engineers and get some ideas and make a better tower. So that now I was in the carpool lane, I had my teammates with me, and we did the science and engineering practices, but we also had to look at the new content area. And for us, we had 2 new content areas in first grade. One was that planets and the sun and the moon behave in observable patterns. And we also had to do some learning about sound and light, okay? So these are 2 new areas for us as first grade teachers. So together, my teammates and I, we went to a FOSS training, you know, one of those after-school trainings from 4 to 7, where you're happy because you get a free dinner, like tonight. And we all went together, and we also were able to earn a test kit that way, an NGSS FOSS test kit. And first, we didn't do the moon. First, we went into light and sound, which reminded me of Dr. Lovelace's talk, because I have to think, okay, as a first grade teacher, I want my scholars to love science. I want them to be like Kevin, right? And just keep loving it so that they get into Alistair's class and want to continue. And then they're going to get to perhaps be a colleague of Dr. Lovelace. And when he was talking, much as I don't know much about black holes, but one thing I do know is when he showed those mirrors, and I thought, yes, because in the first grade, we actually do mirror experiments with light. That's part of our new standards of the NGSS. And so we did have scholars with flashlights and mirrors directing light around the room, because some engineer had to make that tool that he uses to get to his data. And that's an exciting thing. So in this picture here, at our school, we are delving into the NGSS. This is an awareness year, and we're using each other's expertise. So in this example here, we had our whole staff, and it was really fun. We stood around in a circle, and we're using styrofoam balls on sticks here, and we're showing the moon phases. And it is actually inspiring to see teachers, going like this and just gasping, because they actually see all the phases at once. Because that's something I've learned as a grown-up. There are so many of us that never did hands-on experiments when we were young. And so for me, when I was young in Catholic school, science was the science fair every year. But then as a teacher, what I love about my job is I am always learning something new. So when we were doing this, my principal said to me, "Why is it called a gibbous moon?" And you know what? I went home and I thought, oh my goodness, my whole life I knew waxing, waning, gibbous, but I never knew why the word gibbous was used. And so I looked it up, and sure enough, gibbous means humped. So there you go. I learned even something new myself. So back on the highway, now I feel like I'm in a van pool, okay? So I'm not by myself. I'm not in a carpool. But one of the things that we have to do as elementary school teachers is we have a big job. We have to teach reading, writing, science, math. And science is a fabulous vehicle to do all of those things. I have never met a child, an ill-behaved scholar, say, "Boy, Mrs. Slee, I don't want to do any more hands-on science," right? It's like any child that is acting up will not be acting up if you're doing something in hands-on science. And the amount of language development that happens when you're talking to each other about science. Science can be the motivator to learn to read and to learn to write. It can be a lever up for our English language learners. It can be life-changing. On the way here, I asked my husband, I said, "Hey, what does a beginning engineer make after 4 years of college?" And you know what? A low-paying beginning engineer will start at $70,000. So it can be a life-changing career. But you might be wondering about Kevin, like, what is that Kevin doing? Did he end up growing up to be a scientist, perhaps an engineer like his dad? And he didn't. He works in film and TV. But guess what? You need to know a lot of science to take that perfect shot. You need to know a lot of science to make those visual effects, okay? So creating a STEM literate citizenry is really important, and we can't do it alone. We can do it by uniting and having collaborations with the university. You know that now that I met Dr. Lovelace, I'll be having my scholars see if we can Skype with him, because we're learning about the moon. You know that I might ask Alistair now if his students can Skype with my scholars, because I'm not afraid to ask, and that's what I encourage you to do. I cannot do it all myself. I asked my friend who's a technology TOSA, "Hey, we made these great towers. I want the scholars to write about them. I don't know how to do it." She said, "Oh, you can do the Google Classroom. You put the pictures in." Sure enough, we collaborated, and then the scholars just had to go to the Google Classroom, find the picture of themselves, and write about their tower. So this is how we can get into the NGSS as elementary school teachers. We don't have to wait for a publisher, because what we need to do is join organizations like the California Science Teacher Organization, look at Science and Children magazines, dip into it one step at a time by collaborating across districts and across levels so that we gain from each other's expertise, okay? And I think that's the biggest thing I want to say to you is not be afraid to ask, work together and collaborate. And also seek out the expertise from the informal organizations. My journey has been made easier by working with like the Discovery Cube, going to trainings, the Ecology Center, asking parents to come into the classroom and to share their expertise, asking my husband to come into the classroom with his engineering expertise. So if we all work together, we don't have to wait. We can get on the road right now.